The small mining colony of Kepler 442b had always been considered the dead end of human civilization. Located on the outer rim of explored space, it served as nothing more than a fuel depot for ships heading into the unknown. The red dust never settled, the twin suns burned everything they touched, and most people who came here were either running from something or had nowhere else to go. Tommy Chen was neither. At 12 years old, he had been born on this forgotten world to parents who worked the lithium mines. His mother operated the massive drilling equipment that carved through the planet's crust, while his father maintained the atmospheric processors that made the air barely breathable. They were good people, hard-working and honest, but they had never expected their son to be anything more than another miner. Tommy spent most of his days in the colony's small school, learning basic mathematics and reading from outdated textbooks that had been shipped here decades ago. The other children his age numbered only 7, and they all shared the same dream of someday earning enough credits to buy passage off-world. Tommy was different, though he didn't know it yet. While the other children played games during their free time, Tommy found himself drawn to the old observation deck that overlooked the mining operations. From there, he could see the massive machines working day and night, their metal arms reaching deep into the planet's surface. But what fascinated Tommy most were the strange formations in the rock. The miners called them crystal veins, but Tommy saw something else entirely. The patterns reminded him of bones, as if something enormous had once lived beneath the surface of this barren world. One evening, as the twin suns set behind the distant mountains, Tommy noticed something unusual. A section of the mining operation had stopped working, and emergency lights flashed across the dig site. He pressed his face against the observation deck's reinforced glass and watched as his parents and the other miners gathered around one of the drilling sites. Dr. Sarah Vance, the colony's chief geologist, was pointing at something in the exposed rock face. Even from his distance, Tommy could see that whatever they had found was big. The emergency comm system crackled to life throughout the colony, and Tommy heard his father's voice calling for all non-essential personnel to return to their quarters immediately. But Tommy couldn't tear himself away from the window. As he watched, the mining crew brought in portable floodlights to illuminate the dig site. What he saw next would change everything he thought he knew about his boring little world. Embedded in the rock face was what looked like a massive skeletal structure. The bones were unlike anything in Tommy's textbooks about Earth animals. They were too large, too complex, and they seemed to shimmer with an inner light that made them visible even through tons of solid rock. The skull alone was the size of a mining transport, with eye sockets that could have housed a grown person. Tommy's heart raced as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just any fossil. This was the remains of something that looked exactly like the dragons from the old Earth stories his grandmother used to tell him. But that was impossible. Dragons were just myths, stories made up to entertain children. They had never been real, and they certainly had never existed on distant mining worlds. The comm system crackled again, and this time it was Dr. Vance's voice. All colonists are to remain in their quarters until further notice. We've made a significant archaeological discovery that requires immediate attention from the Colonial Science Division. A research team will be arriving within the week. Tommy finally stepped away from the window, his mind spinning with questions. If this was just a fossil, why were they calling in scientists from the inner colonies? Why did the skeleton seem to glow with its own light? And why did looking at it make something deep inside Tommy's chest feel warm and strange? That night, Tommy lay in his small bed listening to his parents whisper in the next room. He caught fragments of their conversation through the thin walls. His mother was worried about what the discovery might mean for the mining operation. His father thought they might all be relocated while scientists studied the find. Neither of them seemed to understand the true significance of what they had uncovered. Tommy couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the massive skull staring back at him from the rock face. But it wasn't frightening. Instead, it felt familiar, like looking at the face of an old friend he had forgotten. The warm feeling in his chest grew stronger, and he began to hear something that might have been music, or might have been the wind, or might have been something else entirely. Around midnight, Tommy gave up trying to sleep. He quietly slipped out of his quarters and made his way back to the observation deck. The mining site was empty now, but the emergency lights still cast their harsh glow over the exposed skeleton. Tommy pressed his hands against the glass and stared down at the ancient remains. As he watched, something impossible happened. The skeleton's eye sockets began to glow with a soft blue light. Tommy blinked hard, certain he was seeing things, but the glow remained. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, the warm feeling in Tommy's chest grew stronger. Then he heard it clearly for the first time. Not music, not wind, but something that sounded almost like a voice. It was speaking words he didn't recognize in a language he had never heard, but somehow he understood the meaning perfectly. Chosen one, the voice whispered inside his mind. Blood of the ancient bond. You have come at last. Tommy stumbled backward from the window, his heart pounding. He had to be dreaming. Fossils didn't glow. Dead things didn't speak. And 12-year-old boys from mining colonies weren't chosen for anything except a lifetime of hard work and red dust. But as he stood there in the darkness of the observation deck, Tommy Chen felt something awakening inside him that had been sleeping for generations. Something that connected him to the massive creature buried beneath his feet, and to others like it scattered across the galaxy. Something that would soon make him the most important human being alive. He just didn't know it yet. The research team arrived 3 days later aboard a sleek Colonial Science Division vessel that looked completely out of place on the dusty landing pad of Kepler 442b. Tommy watched from his family's small quarters as dozens of scientists in clean white uniforms disembarked, carrying equipment he had never seen before. Their leader was a tall woman with silver hair who introduced herself to the colonists as Dr. Elena Vasquez. Senior xenoarchaeologist, Tommy's parents were required to attend the colony meeting that evening, where Dr. Vasquez explained that the discovery was potentially the most significant archaeological find in human history. She used words like unprecedented and paradigm-shifting that made the miners shuffle uncomfortably in their seats. What she didn't say, but what Tommy somehow knew, was that she was lying about something important. During the following week, the mining operation was completely shut down while the scientists worked. Tommy tried to maintain his normal routine of school and chores, but the warm feeling in his chest had grown stronger each day. Sometimes he would catch himself humming melodies he had never heard before, or drawing symbols in the red dust that seemed familiar, but made no sense to his conscious mind. It was during his third sleepless night that Tommy decided he had to get closer to the dig site. The scientists had erected a large temporary structure around the exposed skeleton, blocking it from view, but Tommy knew the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the mining complex better than anyone. His father had shown them to him years ago during one of the rare dust storms that could trap people above ground for days. Slipping out of his quarters was easy. The night security on Kepler 442b had always been minimal, and most of the scientists were either sleeping or working in their temporary laboratory modules. Tommy made his way to the maintenance access point and climbed down into the tunnel system. The passages were narrow and poorly lit, but he knew exactly where he was going. The tunnel that ran beneath the dig site had been sealed off when the scientists arrived, but Tommy had expected that. What he hadn't expected was that the metal barrier they had installed was warm to the touch and humming with a low frequency that he could feel in his bones. As soon as his fingers made contact with the metal, the humming stopped and the barrier simply opened, as if recognizing him. Tommy crawled through the opening and found himself in a small chamber directly beneath the dig site. Above him, he could see the bottom of the skeletal structure through a grate in the tunnel ceiling. But what took his breath away wasn't the fossil itself. It was the fact that the entire chamber was filled with a soft, blue light that seemed to emanate from the bones themselves. As Tommy stared upward, the voice returned, clearer than before. "You have come," it said. And this time Tommy was certain the words were forming inside his own mind. The blood remembers what the mind has forgotten. "Who are you?" Tommy whispered, feeling slightly foolish for talking to what everyone insisted was just an ancient fossil. "I am Kyreth," the voice replied, "last of the Draconic Council, guardian of the ancient pact. And you, young one, are the heir to something your species has forgotten they ever possessed." The light from the bones grew brighter, and Tommy felt a strange tingling sensation spreading through his body. It started in his chest where the warm feeling had been growing, but soon extended to his fingertips and the top of his head. When he looked down at his hands, he could see faint traces of the same blue light playing across his skin. "This is impossible," Tommy said. "You're dead. You've been dead for thousands of years. Death is not what your kind believes it to be." Kyreth's voice carried a note of ancient amusement. My body sleeps, yes, but my spirit remains bound to this place, waiting for one who could hear the call. You are not the first of your bloodline I have spoken to, but you may be the last chance to restore what was lost." Before Tommy could ask what that meant, he heard voices approaching from the dig site above. The scientists were returning for their night shift. Tommy quickly made his way back through the tunnel, but not before Kyrith spoke once more. "Seek the old woman who came with the first ships." The dragon's voice followed him through the darkness. "She remembers what others chose to forget. But beware, young heir. There are those among your kind who would kill to possess what flows in your veins." Tommy emerged from the maintenance tunnels just as the first lights began to appear in the scientist's work area. He made it back to his quarters without being seen, but sleep was impossible. His mind raced with questions about bloodlines and ancient pacts and old women who remembered forgotten things. The next morning, Tommy approached Mrs. Chen, the colony's oldest resident. She wasn't related to Tommy despite sharing his last name, but she had been one of the original colonists who established the mining operation nearly 40 years ago. Most people considered her a bit eccentric, always talking about the old ways and keeping to herself in her small quarters filled with books and strange artifacts from Earth. "Mrs. Chen," Tommy said, finding her in the colony's small garden, where she grew vegetables in the artificial soil. "Can I ask you about something?" The old woman looked up from her tomato plants and studied Tommy's face with sharp eyes that seemed far younger than her wrinkled features. "You've been having dreams," she said, and it wasn't a question. Tommy's mouth fell open. "How did you know?" Mrs. Chen set down her gardening tools and gestured for Tommy to sit beside her on a small bench. "Because your great-great-grandmother had the same look in her eyes when she was about your age. The same light trying to break through. I don't understand. Your family line goes back to the early days of space exploration, boy. Back when humanity first left Earth and encountered things among the stars that the history books don't talk about anymore. Your ancestor, Li Weichen, was part of the crew that made first contact with the Draconic Council." Tommy's heart began to race. "Dragons were real?" "Real as you and me," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Magnificent beings who had traveled the galaxy for millions of years before humans ever looked up at the stars. They were ancient and wise and powerful beyond imagination. And for a brief time, they were our allies." "What happened to them?" Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. "Fear happened. Greed happened. Some humans couldn't accept that we weren't the most advanced species in the universe. They wanted the dragons' technology, their knowledge, their power. When the dragons refused to share their most sacred secrets, certain factions within human leadership decided that if they couldn't have those gifts willingly, they would take them by force." Tommy thought about the massive skeleton buried beneath the colony, about Kyreth's warning that some humans would kill for what was in his blood. "They fought a war?" "Not a war," Mrs. Chen said sadly. "A betrayal. The dragons trusted us, and we used that trust to destroy them. But before the end, a few dragons formed bonds with certain human families, blood bonds that would carry their essence forward through the generations, waiting for a time when both species might need each other again." The old woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crystalline pendant that seemed to pulse with the same blue light Tommy had seen in the dig site. "Your great-great-grandmother gave this to me before she died. She made me promise to give it to the next child born with the dragon's call in their blood." As soon as the pendant touched Tommy's palm, the world exploded into light and sensation. He could feel the presence of every living thing in the colony, could sense the sleeping consciousness of Kyreth beneath the ground, and most shocking of all, could detect the faint but unmistakable signatures of other dragons scattered across the galaxy. They weren't all dead. Some were sleeping like Kyreth, others were hidden, and a few were awake and waiting for the return of their bonded bloodlines. Tommy looked up at Mrs. Chen with eyes that now held flecks of blue light. "What am I supposed to do?" The old woman smiled, and for the first time in years she looked truly hopeful. "You're going to wake them up, child. All of them. And together, you're going to remind the galaxy what real power looks like." The pendant changed everything. Within hours of touching the crystalline artifact, Tommy began experiencing visions that felt more real than his actual surroundings. He saw flashes of ancient starships larger than space stations, beings of incredible beauty and power soaring through the void between stars, and most disturbing of all, scenes of betrayal and destruction that made his heart ache with a grief that felt both foreign and deeply personal. But the visions weren't the most dramatic change. Tommy discovered that he could now sense things he had never noticed before. He could feel the emotional states of everyone around him, detect lies as easily as breathing, and most remarkably, he found that certain pieces of technology responded to his presence in ways that baffled the adults. Dr. Vasquez noticed it first. Tommy was walking past the scientist's equipment array when one of their quantum resonance scanners suddenly activated and began displaying readings that made no sense according to their current understanding of physics. The incident was dismissed as a technical malfunction until it happened 3 more times, always when Tommy was nearby. The boy seems to have an unusual electromagnetic signature, Dr. Vasquez mentioned to Tommy's parents during what she claimed was a routine health check. Has he ever shown any aptitude for working with sensitive electronics? Tommy's father laughed. Tommy can barely operate his homework tablet without help. He's not exactly what you'd call technically gifted, but Tommy knew better. The equipment wasn't malfunctioning. It was recognizing something in him. Just like the barrier in the maintenance tunnel had opened at his touch, the dragon blood was awakening capabilities that human science couldn't explain or measure. That night, Kyreth's voice returned stronger than ever. The pendant was wise to reveal itself now, the ancient dragon said as Tommy sat in the underground chamber. Your awakening is accelerating. Soon others will begin to notice the changes. What kind of changes? Tommy asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. You are becoming what your ancestor was meant to be, a bridge between species, a conduit for power that neither humans nor dragons could wield alone. Kyreth's mental voice carried centuries of patient wisdom, but there are those who have spent generations hunting for bloodlines like yours. They are coming. As if summoned by the dragon's warning, Tommy heard unfamiliar voices approaching the dig site above. These weren't the Colonial Science Division researchers he had grown accustomed to hearing. These voices carried authority and urgency that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Tommy quickly made his way back through the maintenance tunnels and emerged near the colony's main administrative building. What he saw there made his blood run cold. 3 ships had landed during the night, sleek black vessels that bore no colonial markings. Figures in dark uniforms were setting up some kind of command post, while others moved through the colony with scanning equipment. Genetic trace confirmed in Sector 7, one of them said into a handheld communicator as he passed near Tommy's hiding spot. Signal is strong. The bloodline is definitely active. Tommy's heart pounded as he realized they were tracking him. Somehow these people knew what he was becoming, and they were here to find him. He thought about running to his parents, but a new instinct warned him that involving them would only put them in danger. Instead, Tommy made his way to Mrs. Chen's quarters. He found the old woman packing a small bag with the efficiency of someone who had been expecting this moment for years. They're here, aren't they? She said without looking up from her preparations. Who are they? Tommy whispered. The Prometheus group. Mrs. Chen replied, her voice heavy with old anger. They're the descendants of the faction that betrayed the dragons all those centuries ago. They've spent generations hunting down the bonded bloodlines, trying to harvest the dragon essence for themselves. Harvest? Tommy didn't like the sound of that word. Mrs. Chen finally met his eyes, and Tommy saw fear there that made his stomach clench. They believe they can extract the dragon blood and transfer it to themselves. They've never succeeded, but not for lack of trying. Many children with gifts like yours have disappeared over the years. The sound of boots on metal made them both freeze. The Prometheus soldiers were systematically searching the colony, moving from quarters to quarters. They would reach Mrs. Chen's section within minutes. There's a way out, Mrs. Chen said quietly, but it's dangerous and there's no going back once we start down this path. What do you mean? The old woman pulled out a small device that looked like a modified emergency beacon. This will send a signal to those who have been waiting for someone like you to emerge. Other descendants of the bonded families, dragons who still sleep in hidden places, allies who remember the old alliance. But once you activate it, the Prometheus group will know exactly what you are and where you are. They'll never stop hunting you. Your quiet life as a miner's son ends tonight, no matter what you choose. Tommy thought about his parents, about the small but comfortable life he had always known on Kepler 442b. Then he thought about Kyreth's voice speaking of ancient pacts and forgotten alliances, about the warm power growing in his chest, about the visions of dragons soaring through space. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Tommy took the beacon from Mrs. Chen's hands. The moment his fingers touched it, the device came alive with blue light that matched the glow now permanently visible in his eyes. "What do I do?" "Press the activation stud and hold it until the light turns white," Mrs. Chen said. "Then we run." Tommy pressed the stud. The beacon grew warm in his hands, its light shifting from blue to silver to brilliant white. Somewhere in the distance he heard shouting as the Prometheus soldiers detected the energy surge. "Signal confirmed," a voice called out. "High-intensity biokinetic discharge from Sector 12. Mrs. Chen grabbed Tommy's arm and pulled him toward a hidden panel in the back wall of her quarters. "Emergency escape route," she explained as they crawled into a narrow maintenance shaft. "It leads to the old mining tunnels that connect to the landing pad." As they crawled through the cramped space, Tommy could hear the Prometheus soldiers breaking down Mrs. Chen's door. Their frustrated shouts followed them through the walls, along with the sound of equipment being smashed in their search for clues. "Where are we going?" Tommy asked as they emerged into one of the main mining tunnels. "To meet your ride," Mrs. Chen said with a grim smile. They ran through the tunnel system toward the landing pad, but when they emerged, Tommy saw that the Prometheus ships were between them and any chance of escape. The soldiers had established a perimeter, and their scanning equipment was painting the night with searching beams of light. Tommy was about to ask Mrs. Chen what they were supposed to do now when he heard it. A sound unlike anything he had ever experienced, coming from somewhere high above the colony. It started as a whisper of wind, but quickly grew into something that made the ground beneath their feet vibrate. The sound of massive wings. Mrs. Chen smiled as she looked up at the night sky. Right on time. A shadow passed over the colony, blotting out the stars. The Prometheus soldiers began shouting and pointing their weapons upward, but their lights couldn't penetrate the darkness high above. Then, without warning, lightning began to fall from the clear sky. Not natural lightning. Controlled bolts of energy that struck with surgical precision, disabling the Prometheus ships and equipment without harming the colonial structures or the sleeping miners. In the space of 30 seconds, the most advanced military technology humanity had developed was reduced to smoking scrap metal. The shadow descended, and Tommy finally saw what had answered his beacon's call. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen, a dragon the size of a small starship, its scales shifting between deep purple and silver as it moved. Its eyes burned with the same blue light that now flickered in Tommy's own gaze, and when it spoke, its voice resonated both in the air and directly in Tommy's mind. "I am Zarathax," it said, landing with surprising grace despite its enormous size. "I have waited 3 centuries for your bloodline to awaken. It is time to go home, young heir." The surviving Prometheus soldiers had fled, but Tommy knew they would return with reinforcements. As he climbed onto the dragon's back with Mrs. Chen's help, he took one last look at the colony where he had spent his entire life. His parents would wake tomorrow to find him gone. They would probably assume he had been killed in whatever disaster had destroyed the Prometheus equipment. It would break their hearts, and that knowledge made Tommy's chest ache with guilt. But as Zarathax spread her wings and launched them into the star-filled void, Tommy felt something else growing alongside the guilt. Purpose. For the first time in his 12 years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. "Where are we going?" he asked the dragon as Kepler 442b fell away below them. "To the sanctuary," Zarathax replied, "where the last of your kind learned to become what they were born to be." The journey to the sanctuary took 3 days of travel through hyperspace aboard Zarathax's vessel, a biomechanical ship that seemed to be grown rather than built. The dragon had explained that traditional spacecraft were too crude for beings who could manipulate the fundamental forces of space and time. So they had developed ships that were extensions of their own consciousness. Tommy spent most of the journey trying to understand what was happening to him. The changes were accelerating now that he was away from Kepler 442b. His eyes now glowed constantly with blue light. He could hear Zarathax's thoughts even when she wasn't deliberately speaking to him. And most remarkably, he found that he could influence the ship's systems with his mind. "Your human technology tries to force the universe to obey," Zarathax explained as Tommy accidentally activated the navigation display just by looking at it. "Dragon technology works by finding harmony with the natural forces that already exist. You are learning to be a conductor rather than a conqueror." Mrs. Chen had remained mostly quiet during the journey, but Tommy could sense her complex emotions through their shared proximity. She was relieved that they had escaped the Prometheus group, proud that she had finally fulfilled her promise to Tommy's ancestor, but also deeply sad about leaving behind the only life she had known for 40 years. "I knew this day would come," she said when Tommy asked her about it. "But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally are very different things. I've spent my entire adult life preparing you for a destiny I could never fully understand myself." When they finally dropped out of hyperspace, Tommy gasped at what he saw through the ship's bioluminescent windows. They were approaching a system with 2 yellow stars orbiting each other, surrounded by a dozen planets in perfect gravitational balance. But what took his breath away wasn't the astronomical beauty of the system. It was the structures. Massive crystalline formations floated in the space between planets, connected by streams of energy that pulsed like veins carrying lifeblood. Some of the structures were clearly artificial, geometric patterns that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Others seemed organic, growing like coral reefs in the void of space. "Welcome to Draconis Sanctum," Zarathax said with pride evident in her mental voice. "The last free system in the galaxy, hidden from human sensors by technologies your species cannot even detect." As they approached one of the larger crystal formations, Tommy saw that it wasn't empty. Figures moved within its translucent walls, and landing bays opened to receive incoming ships. But what amazed him most was the diversity of those ships. Some were sleek metal vessels that looked human in design. Others were biomechanical like Zarathax's craft, and a few seemed to be made of pure crystallized energy. "How many people live here?" Tommy asked. 17,000 humans of bonded bloodlines," Zarathax replied. 432 dragons in various stages of awakening, and representatives from 6 other species that the Prometheus group has driven into hiding over the past 3 centuries. Tommy's mind reeled. Other species? Humanity was not the first race to encounter the dragon's young heir. Nor were they the first to betray that alliance when fear and greed overcame wisdom. The Prometheus group and their predecessors have spent millennia destroying any civilization that refused to surrender its secrets to human ambition. The ship docked with a gentle bump that Tommy barely felt. As the biomechanical doors dilated open, he got his first breath of sanctuary air. It was clean and sweet, filled with scents he couldn't identify but that made something deep in his genetic memory feel utterly at home. A delegation was waiting for them in the docking bay. Tommy saw humans of all ages, their eyes glowing with the same blue light that now marked his own. Some wore simple clothing that looked like practical work gear. Others were dressed in flowing robes that seemed to shift color as they moved. But what commanded Tommy's attention were the dragons. 3 of them waited in the bay, each unique in size and coloration. The largest was deep gold with scales that looked like polished metal. The smallest was barely larger than Zarathax, covered in scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The third was somewhere between the other 2 in size, but its scales shifted through every color of the spectrum as Tommy watched. "Behold," said the golden dragon, its voice carrying such authority that Tommy felt compelled to stand straighter. "The last of the Chen bloodline awakens at last." A human woman approached Tommy and Mrs. Chen as they disembarked. She appeared to be in her 30s with short dark hair and eyes that held flecks of silver light instead of blue. "I'm Dr. Maya Patel," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the sanctuary. I'm what you might call the human liaison here, though we don't really maintain the same rigid hierarchies your outer colonies seem to prefer." "How long have you been here?" Mrs. Chen asked. "I was born here," Dr. Patel replied. "Third-generation sanctuary resident. My grandmother was part of the first group of bonded families to escape the Prometheus purges." She turned to Tommy with an expression of curiosity, mixed with hope. "But you're something special, aren't you? We've been monitoring the awakening signatures from your sector for months. The intensity was unlike anything we've recorded before." Tommy wasn't sure how to respond to that, but he didn't need to. The golden dragon spoke again, its mental voice resonating with such power that Tommy felt it in his bones. "The boy carries more than just dragon blood," the ancient being said. "He carries the essence of Kyrith the Unbroken, last of the High Council. Through him, we may finally reclaim what was lost." Dr. Patel's eyes widened. "Kyrith chose a human heir? But the Council swore they would never again risk their essence with mortal bloodlines after the great betrayal." "Kyrith saw what others could not," Zarathax interjected. "The boy's lineage carries genes from 3 separate bonded families. His great-great-grandmother was Chen Li Wei, bonded to House Kyrith. His maternal line traces back to Sarah Mitchell, who was bonded to House Vexhar, and his paternal great-grandfather carried the blood of Marcus Torres. Last survivor of House Zalthon, the dragons in the docking bay all turned their attention to Tommy with an intensity that made him want to hide behind Mrs. Chen. He could feel their mental scrutiny like a physical pressure, as if they were seeing through his skin to examine his very DNA. 3 houses, the spectrum-scaled dragon said with wonder. No human has carried the blood of 3 houses since the original Concord was signed. What does that mean? Tommy asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Dr. Patel and the dragons exchanged looks that were heavy with significance. Finally, the golden dragon spoke. It means, young heir, that you may be capable of something no being has accomplished in over 3,000 years. You may be able to awaken the sleepers. The sleepers? The oldest and most powerful dragons, Dr. Patel explained. They went into deep hibernation when the Great Betrayal began, hiding themselves in places so remote and well protected that even we don't know where they all are. They swore they would only wake when the ancient alliance could be truly restored. The black-scaled dragon's voice was softer than the others, but somehow more ominous. And if the sleepers wake, young heir, the balance of power in this galaxy will shift permanently. The Prometheus group and their human empire will discover that there are forces in this universe, far older and more dangerous than their wildest nightmares. Tommy felt the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. A week ago, he had been nothing more than a miner's son on a forgotten world. Now apparently he was the key to awakening ancient beings that could change the fate of entire civilizations. I don't know how to do any of this, he said quietly. I don't even understand what's happening to me. Dr. Patel smiled and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. That's why you're here. We're going to teach you everything you need to know about your heritage, your abilities, and your responsibilities. But first you need to see the memorial. She led Tommy and Mrs. Chen deeper into the crystal structure, through corridors that seemed to have been grown rather than carved. The walls pulsed with soft light that responded to their presence, brightening as they approached and dimming as they passed. They finally emerged into a vast chamber at the heart of the structure. The floor was made of some kind of crystalline material that was completely transparent, giving the illusion that they were walking on empty air. But it was what filled the space below the floor that made Tommy gasp in awe and horror. Thousands upon thousands of small lights floated in the darkness beneath their feet, each one representing a life lost to the Prometheus group's campaigns against the bonded bloodlines. Human lights glowed with various colors depending on which dragon house they had been bonded to. Dragon lights burned with the fierce radiance of dying stars. This is why we exist, Dr. Patel said softly. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. And now, for the first time in 3 centuries, we have hope that the memorial may finally be complete. Tommy stared down at the lights, feeling the weight of all those lost lives, all those broken bonds, all that destroyed potential. The warm feeling in his chest had transformed into something fiercer, something that felt like righteous anger mixed with unshakable determination. When he looked up, his eyes were blazing with blue light so intense that the dragons in the chamber all stepped back in recognition and respect. Tell me what I need to learn, Tommy said, and his voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. Tell me how to wake the sleepers. Tommy's training began the next morning in a chamber that defied every law of physics he thought he understood. The room was simultaneously vast and intimate, with walls that seemed to stretch into infinity while somehow feeling close enough to touch. Dr. Patel explained that it was a training construct, a space where the boundaries between thought and reality became fluid. The first lesson every bonded human must learn, said Vextara, the spectrum-scaled dragon who had been assigned as Tommy's primary instructor, is that your human understanding of reality is incomplete. You think in terms of limitations, boundaries, impossibilities. Dragons think in terms of potential, harmony, and the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. Tommy stood in the center of the construct, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what he was being asked to learn. How do I even start? Close your eyes, Vextara instructed. Feel the warmth in your chest, the place where the dragon essence has awakened. Now, instead of thinking of it as something foreign inside you, imagine it as a doorway to everything you've never been able to access. Tommy followed the instructions, focusing on the familiar warm sensation that had been growing stronger every day. As he concentrated, the feeling expanded, and suddenly he was aware of things he had never noticed before. He could sense the life energy of everyone in the construct, feel the flow of power through the crystal structure around them, even detect the distant pulse of the twin stars that powered the sanctuary. "Excellent," Vexitara said, and Tommy could hear the approval in the dragon's mental voice. "Now reach out to the construct systems. Don't try to control them, simply ask them to show you what they can do." Tommy extended his consciousness toward the chamber's walls, and immediately the space around them transformed. The walls became transparent, revealing the vast cosmos beyond the sanctuary. Stars wheeled overhead, and Tommy could see other crystal structures floating in the distance, each one pulsing with different patterns of light. "I can see everything," Tommy whispered, his eyes still closed. "That is just the beginning," Vextara replied. "What you're experiencing now is basic dragon sight, the ability to perceive the energy patterns that connect all living things. With practice, you'll be able to see across vast distances, through time and into the spaces between dimensions where the sleepers hide." The training continued for hours, with Tommy learning to manipulate the construct's environment using nothing but focused thought and the growing power within him. He learned to create objects from pure energy, to alter the properties of matter, and most remarkably, to communicate directly with the dragon consciousness that had become part of his own mind. But the real breakthrough came during his third week at the sanctuary, when Vextara introduced him to the concept of the Great Song. "Every living thing in the universe contributes to a vast symphony of existence," the dragon explained as they stood in a different chamber. This one filled with floating crystalline instruments that played themselves according to the energy patterns of whoever was present. Dragons learned long ago to hear this song and to add their voices to it in harmony. The bonded bloodlines were originally created so that humans could learn to participate in the Great Song as well. "What does it sound like?" Tommy asked. Instead of answering with words, Vextara opened her mind completely to Tommy's consciousness. The experience was overwhelming. Suddenly, Tommy could hear the music that underlied all of reality. Every star sang with its own note. Every planet contributed its rhythm. Every living being added its unique melody to the cosmic symphony. But there were holes in the song, dark spaces where voices had been silenced, harmonies broken by violence and betrayal. Tommy realized he was hearing the damage that 3 centuries of conflict had done to the fundamental fabric of existence itself. "The Prometheus group doesn't just kill people," Tommy said as the revelation hit him. "They're damaging reality itself." "Now you begin to understand the true scope of what we face," Vextara replied. "Every bonded bloodline they destroy, every dragon they kill, every alliance they break weakens the Great Song. If they continue for much longer, the symphony itself may collapse, taking all life in the galaxy with it." That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his quarters, looking out at the dancing lights of the sanctuary, and tried to process everything he had learned. The responsibility he carried felt impossibly heavy. Not just the fate of the surviving dragons and bonded humans, but the very stability of reality itself depended on his ability to master powers he barely understood. Mrs. Chen found him there in the early hours of the morning. She had been attending her own sessions with the sanctuary's historians, learning about the true scope of human expansion and the civilizations that had been destroyed in its wake. "It's too much," Tommy said without turning away from the window. "I'm just a kid from a mining colony. How am I supposed to save the galaxy?" "You're not," Mrs. Chen said gently. "You're supposed to save yourself first. Everything else will follow from that." "What do you mean?" The old woman sat down on Tommy's bed and gestured for him to join her. "Your great-great-grandmother used to say that the dragons didn't choose humans to bond with because they needed our help. They chose us because they saw something in humanity that we couldn't see in ourselves, a potential for growth, for change, for becoming something greater than what we started as." Tommy finally turned away from the window. "But what if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't wake the sleepers?" "Then you'll have tried," Mrs. Chen said simply, "and that will be enough to restore something that's been missing from the galaxy for 3 centuries. Hope." The next morning brought urgent news that changed everything. Dr. Patel burst into the training chamber where Tommy was working with Vexitara, her face pale with worry. "We've received intelligence reports from our contacts in the outer colonies," she said breathlessly. "The Prometheus group has found the location of a sleeper. Vexitara's scales immediately shifted to deep red, a sign of extreme agitation that Tommy had learned to recognize. "Which sleeper?" "Morgath the Voidwalker," Dr. Patel replied. "The scouts found his hibernation chamber on a rogue planet in the Kepler sector. They're mobilizing a full extraction fleet." Tommy felt the blood drain from his face. He had learned about Morgath during his history lessons. The Voidwalker was one of the most powerful dragons who had ever lived, capable of manipulating space and time on a scale that made entire star systems possible. If the Prometheus group managed to capture him and extract his essence, they could become powerful enough to hunt down every remaining dragon in the galaxy. Tommy finished the thought aloud. "Worse than that," Vextara said grimly. "Morgath's power is tied directly to the fundamental structure of spacetime. If they damage him in their extraction attempts, they could create tears in reality itself." Dr. Patel looked at Tommy with desperate hope. "You're not ready. Your training isn't complete. But you may be the only one who can reach Morgath before they do." Tommy thought about everything he had learned over the past weeks. The dragon sight that let him perceive energy patterns across vast distances. The ability to manipulate matter and energy with focused thought. The growing connection to the great song that linked all living things. Most importantly, he thought about the 3 bloodlines that flowed through his veins, giving him access to power that no human had wielded in centuries. "How long do we have?" he asked. "The Prometheus fleet will reach Morgath's location in 6 days," Dr. Patel replied. "We can get you there in 4, but only if we leave immediately." Tommy looked at Vextara, who was studying him with an expression of profound worry mixed with reluctant pride. "Do you think I'm ready?" "No," the dragon replied honestly, "but readiness is a luxury we no longer have. The question isn't whether you're ready, young heir. The question is whether you're willing." Tommy thought about his parents, probably still mourning his disappearance on Kepler 442b. He thought about all the bonded bloodlines that had been destroyed over the centuries. Their lights added to the memorial below the crystal floor. He thought about the holes in the great song, and the possibility that reality itself might collapse if the Prometheus group succeeded in their goals. Most of all, he thought about the voice of Kyrith, still sleeping beneath the mining colony where his ordinary life had ended, trusting in a 12-year-old boy to restore what had been lost. "I'm willing," Tommy said, and his voice carried harmonics that made the training construct around them resonate in sympathy. "Tell me what I need to do." Dr. Patel smiled, but her eyes remained worried. "We're going to wake a god, Tommy, and then we're going to hope that he remembers the difference between friends and enemies." The journey to reach Morgath took them through the most dangerous region of space Tommy had ever imagined. The rogue planet where the ancient dragon slept existed in a pocket of twisted spacetime, surrounded by gravitational anomalies that could tear apart any conventional starship. Only a vessel bonded with dragon consciousness could navigate the treacherous approach. Tommy traveled aboard Zarathax's ship, accompanied by Dr. Patel, Mrs. Chen, and 3 other dragons, whose combined power would be needed to stabilize the region, while Tommy attempted the awakening. The journey gave him time to study everything the sanctuary's archives contained about Morgath the Voidwalker. What he learned made him question whether waking such a being was wise, even if it was necessary. Morgath had been old when the first human civilizations were learning to make fire. He had witnessed the birth and death of entire star systems, had traveled to realms beyond normal space-time, and had accumulated power on a scale that made other dragons seem like children by comparison. When the Great Betrayal began, Morgath had retreated to his hidden resting place not out of fear, but out of disgust with the violent turn that galactic civilization had taken. The archives suggest he may not be happy about being awakened, Dr. Patel warned Tommy as they studied the ancient texts together. Voidwalkers are known for their detachment from the concerns of lesser beings. "Lesser beings like humans?" Tommy asked. "Lesser beings like everyone who isn't a Voidwalker," Dr. Patel replied with a grimace. Morgath's last recorded words before entering hibernation were, "When next I wake, perhaps the universe will have learned wisdom." That was 800 years ago. Tommy tried not to think about what Morgath's reaction might be when he discovered that the universe had actually gotten significantly worse during his long sleep. Instead, he focused on the meditation techniques Vextara had taught him, preparing his mind for the kind of consciousness contact that would be required to reach a being of Morgath's power. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the anomaly field, and Tommy got his first look at their destination. The rogue planet was a dark sphere roughly the size of Earth, but completely lifeless. It had been ejected from its original solar system millions of years ago and now drifted through the void, generating its own heat through radioactive decay. What made it remarkable wasn't its physical properties, but the way space itself seemed to bend around it. Morgath's presence has been influencing local spacetime for centuries, Zarathax explained as her ship began the delicate process of navigating toward the planet's surface. Reality is more flexible here, which is why the Prometheus group will have difficulty using their normal technology. As if summoned by her words, Tommy's enhanced senses detected something that made his blood run cold. Energy signatures approaching fast from the outer edge of the system, moving in formation patterns that spoke of military precision. "They're already here," he said quietly. Dr. Patel activated the ship's long-range sensors and cursed under her breath. 12 ships. That's a full extraction fleet, complete with quantum drilling equipment and psionic containment fields. Tommy watched the tactical display as the Prometheus vessels established a perimeter around the rogue planet. They were taking their time, probably scanning for the exact location of Morgath's hibernation chamber before beginning their approach. That might give him a small window of opportunity, but not much. "How long before they find him?" Tommy asked. "With that much scanning equipment?" Dr. Patel calculated quickly. "Maybe 2 hours. 3 at most." Zarathax's ship touched down on the planet's surface in a crater that had been carved by some ancient impact. The atmosphere was thin but breathable, and the gravity was lighter than Tommy was used to. More importantly, he could feel Morgath's presence immediately, like a vast weight pressing against the edge of his consciousness. "He's deep," Tommy said as they disembarked. "Deeper than Kyrith was. It's like he's hidden himself in a pocket dimension." "That's exactly what he's done," Dr. Patel confirmed, consulting her instruments. "The hibernation chamber exists in a fold of space that's only partially connected to normal reality. We'll need to establish a stable pathway before you can make contact." The 3 dragons, who had accompanied them, began the complex process of weaving energy, patterns that would stabilize the dimensional fold. Tommy watched in fascination as they worked, their combined power reshaping the fundamental structure of space around them. The air itself began to shimmer, and he could see deeper into the layers of reality than his training had prepared him for. Then he saw the chamber. It existed in a space that was somehow both infinitely large and impossibly small, a crystalline sphere that contained its own miniature universe. At the center of that universe, surrounded by swirling galaxies of energy, was the most magnificent being Tommy had ever seen. Morgath was enormous even by dragon standards, his scales shifting between deep purple and absolute black. But what took Tommy's breath away wasn't the creature's size. It was the sense of age, a vast intelligence of power so profound that it made the space around him bend in reverence. "Now comes the dangerous part," Dr. Patel said quietly. "Making contact with a being that powerful while he's in deep hibernation could kill you if you're not careful. His unconscious mind might react to your presence as a threat." Tommy nodded, understanding the risk but knowing he had no choice. He could sense the Prometheus ships above, their scanning beams growing more focused as they narrowed down Morgath's location. Soon they would begin their descent, and if they reached the chamber before the ancient dragon could be awakened properly, the consequences would be catastrophic. Tommy sat cross-legged on the planet's surface and closed his eyes, reaching out with his consciousness toward the dimensional fold. The moment his awareness touched the edge of Morgath's hibernation space, he felt the full weight of the ancient dragon's sleeping mind. It was like trying to wake an ocean. Morgath's consciousness was so vast, so deep, that Tommy felt like a single drop of water trying to disturb an infinite sea. But he pressed forward, using the techniques Vextara had taught him to amplify his mental voice with the power of the 3 bloodlines flowing through his veins. "Morgath," he called into the sleeping depths. "Voidwalker, Ancient One, I am the heir of 3 houses and I call upon the old bonds." For a moment there was nothing. Then slowly something stirred in the depths of that cosmic consciousness. An eye the size of a small moon opened in the heart of the crystalline chamber, fixing its attention on Tommy with an intensity that made reality tremble. "Who dares disturb the Voidwalker's rest?" The voice that spoke in Tommy's mind carried the weight of millennia. the echoes of dead civilizations, the music of stars being born and dying. What small spark of life thinks to command the attention of one who has walked between the worlds? Tommy felt the overwhelming urge to flee, to break the connection and hide from that terrible gaze. But he forced himself to remain calm, to remember why he was here. "I am Tommy Chen," he replied, putting all of his determination into the mental voice. "Heir to the bloodlines of houses Kireth, Vexhar, and Zalthon. The betrayers have returned, Ancient One. They seek to steal your essence and use it to destroy what remains of the old alliance." Morgath's attention shifted, becoming more focused, more present. Tommy felt the dragon's consciousness expanding beyond the hibernation chamber, reaching out to examine the planet's surface, the approaching Prometheus ships, the state of the galaxy beyond. What the ancient dragon saw there made his rage ignite like a newborn star. "They dare." Morgath's voice had become terrible, carrying harmonics that made the planet's surface crack beneath Tommy's feet. "They dare to come for me with their crude tools and petty ambitions." The crystalline chamber began to dissolve as Morgath's consciousness fully awakened. Reality twisted around them as the Void Walker prepared to emerge from his long sleep. Tommy felt the approach of something so powerful that his human mind could barely comprehend it. Above them, the Prometheus ship suddenly found their instruments going haywire, as space itself began to rebel against their presence. Emergency signals filled the comm frequencies as gravitational waves started tearing their formation apart. "Ancient One," Tommy called desperately, trying to maintain contact as Morgath's awakening transformed the world around them. "The galaxy needs the old alliance restored. There are still those who remember the great song." Morgath's attention turned back to Tommy, and for a moment the dragon's terrible gaze softened with something that might have been approval. "Show me." "Young heir," the Voidwalker commanded. "Show me this song you speak of, and perhaps I will not simply destroy everything within 1,000 light years and return to my rest." Tommy opened his mind completely, sharing everything he had learned about the great song, the memorial of lights, the hope that still lived in the sanctuary. He showed Morgath the faces of the surviving bonded humans, the dragons who still carried the dream of restored alliance, the possibility that the damage done by centuries of betrayal could still be healed. When the sharing was complete, Morgath was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, his massive form began to emerge from the dimensional fold, stepping into normal space for the first time in 8 centuries. "Very well," the ancient dragon said, his voice now carrying notes of something that might have been hope. "Let us see if this young universe can indeed learn wisdom." Above them, the Prometheus fleet was learning exactly what happened when you tried to threaten a being who could reshape reality with a thought. It was not a lesson any of them would survive to remember. Morgath's emergence into normal space changed everything. The ancient dragon's physical form was magnificent beyond description, his scales seeming to contain entire galaxies within their depths. But it was his power that truly transformed the situation. Reality itself bent to accommodate his presence, and the Prometheus fleet found their most advanced technology becoming useless against forces they couldn't even comprehend. Tommy watched in awe as the Voidwalker simply gestured toward the attacking ships. Space folded in on itself, creating a pocket dimension that swallowed the entire Prometheus fleet whole. In less than 30 seconds, 12 of humanity's most powerful warships had been removed from existence as casually as someone might brush away dust. "The betrayers have grown bold in my absence," Morgath said, his mental voice carrying ancient anger. "They multiply like parasites, consuming world after world, destroying civilizations that took millennia to build. This will not continue." Dr. Patel looked terrified by the dragon's casual display of power, but Tommy felt something different. Through his connection to Morgath's consciousness, he could sense the ancient being's true nature. Yes, the Void Walker was incredibly powerful and utterly ruthless when threatened, but beneath that terrible exterior was a deep sadness, a grief for all the beauty that had been lost during his long sleep. "Ancient One," Tommy said carefully, "the sanctuary waits for your guidance. There are others of your kind who still sleep, waiting for the call to awaken." Morgath turned his cosmic gaze toward Tommy, studying the young human with an intensity that made reality shimmer around them. "You carry the blood of 3 houses, young heir. But more than that, you carry something I had not expected to see again in this universe." "What's that?" "Hope tempered with wisdom," the dragon replied. Your species has produced many individuals with hope and many with wisdom, but rarely both in the same being. Perhaps there is indeed a chance for the old alliance to be restored. The ancient dragon's form began to shift, becoming less solid, more energy than matter. But first, there is much work to be done. The Prometheus group is vast, with cells hidden throughout human space. They have spent centuries infiltrating your governments, your military, your corporations. They will not be easily uprooted. Tommy felt a surge of determination that surprised him with its intensity. Then we'll have to be smarter than they are. And more powerful. Morgath's laughter was like the sound of stars being born, spoken like a true heir of the bonded bloodlines. Very well, young one. Let us return to your sanctuary and begin the work of awakening my sleeping kin. The journey back to Draconis Sanctum was unlike anything Tommy had experienced before. Instead of traveling through normal space, Morgath opened a corridor through the void itself, allowing them to cross vast distances in the space of a heartbeat. Tommy found himself standing in the sanctuary's main docking bay, while his mind was still trying to process the transition. The reaction to their arrival was immediate and overwhelming. Every dragon in the sanctuary felt Morgath's presence the moment he materialized, and their combined response created a harmonic resonance that Tommy could feel in his bones. Dragons emerged from every level of the crystal structure, their voices joining in what Tommy realized was a song of greeting that had not been heard for centuries. But the human reaction was more complex. Many of the bonded bloodline descendants were awed by Morgath's presence, but others seemed frightened by the sheer scope of power he represented. Tommy could understand their concern. The ancient dragon was so far beyond anything they had imagined that he seemed more like a force of nature than a potential ally. Dr. Patel approached cautiously, her scientific curiosity warring with her very human sense of self-preservation. "Voidwalker," she said formally, "the sanctuary welcomes you." "The sanctuary," Morgath replied, his mental voice now gentle enough not to cause physical discomfort, "is more impressive than I had expected. You have preserved much knowledge, maintained the old technologies, kept the hope alive. This is worthy work." Over the following weeks, Tommy found himself at the center of preparations for something unprecedented in galactic history. Using his unique connection to the dragon bloodlines, he was able to help Morgath locate the hibernation sites of 7 other sleepers scattered across the galaxy. Each awakening was a monumental undertaking, requiring careful coordination and Tommy's growing mastery of his inherited abilities. The first to wake was Sylandra the Starweaver, a dragon whose power lay in manipulating solar energy and stellar formation. Her awakening lit up an entire solar system as she stretched her consciousness across space, reacquainting herself with the cosmic symphony she had abandoned centuries ago. Next came Thexiron the World Forge, whose mastery of matter and energy allowed him to reshape entire planets with thought alone. His emergence from hibernation triggered seismic events across 3 star systems as his sleeping mind readjusted to active consciousness. Each awakening brought new hope to the sanctuary, but also new challenges. The ancient dragons were not always pleased with what they found upon waking. The galaxy had changed dramatically during their long sleep, and not for the better. Some wanted to simply destroy human civilization and start over. Others proposed retreating to distant galaxies where they could rebuild without interference. It was Tommy who found himself mediating between the ancient powers and the practical needs of the present situation. His youth, which might have been a disadvantage in dealing with beings who had lived for millennia, actually became an asset. The awakened dragon saw in him the potential for a future different from both the flawed past and the troubled present. "You think like a bridge," Vextara explained to Tommy after a particularly difficult negotiation session with 3 of the awakened sleepers. "The ancient ones think in terms of cosmic timescales and absolute solutions. The human descendants think in terms of immediate survival and limited resources. You somehow managed to think in terms of both." The breakthrough came when Tommy proposed a plan that was audacious in its scope, but elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to destroy the Prometheus group through force, they would undermine it by offering humanity something better. For 3 centuries, the Prometheus group has maintained power by convincing humans that dragons were either extinct or too dangerous to trust. Tommy explained to the assembled council of awakened dragons and human leaders. "But what if we showed them what the old alliance really offered? "Speak plainly, young heir," Morgath commanded, though Tommy could sense approval in the ancient dragon's mental voice. "We make contact with human colonies that have been oppressed by Prometheus policies," Tommy continued. "We offer them the benefits of Dragon Alliance: clean energy, advanced medicine, protection from outside threats, access to technologies that can solve their resource problems. We show them that cooperation with dragons leads to prosperity, not domination." The plan was ambitious almost beyond imagination. It would require the awakened dragons to reveal themselves to human populations that had been taught to fear them. It would mean establishing open relationships with colonial governments that had been under Prometheus control for generations. Most risky of all, it would make Tommy and the other bonded descendants visible targets for Prometheus retaliation. But it was also the only plan that offered hope for genuine, lasting change. The first test came when they made contact with the struggling agricultural colonies of the Centauri cluster. These worlds had been strip-mined by Prometheus corporations until their ecosystems were nearly destroyed, then abandoned when the resources were exhausted. The colonists were facing starvation, disease, and eventual evacuation to overcrowded core worlds. Tommy, accompanied by Silandra and a small team of volunteer bonded descendants, arrived in the cluster aboard a ship that made no attempt to hide its dragon-influenced technology. The colonial authorities initially responded with panic, but their tune changed quickly when Silandra demonstrated her ability to restore the damaged atmosphere of their primary agricultural world. Within days, crops that had been failing for years began to flourish. The water that had been poisoned by industrial runoff became clean again. The air itself seemed to shimmer with new vitality, as Silandra's power worked to heal centuries of environmental damage. Word spread quickly through the human colonies. Other worlds began sending desperate requests for help, offering alliance in exchange for the kind of environmental restoration they had witnessed in the Centauri cluster. The Prometheus group's response was swift and violent. They launched attacks on the restored colonies, trying to drive out the dragons and their human allies through sheer force. But they had made a critical miscalculation. The awakened dragons were not the frightened, scattered beings that had been hunted 3 centuries ago. They were united, powerful, and allied with humans who had tasted freedom and would not willingly give it up. The war that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. It was fought not just with weapons and ships, but with competing visions of what humanity could become. On one side stood the Prometheus group, offering the familiar path of conquest, exploitation, and domination over other species. On the other stood the new alliance, promising cooperation, mutual benefit, and a chance to be part of something greater than human ambition alone. Tommy found himself at the center of it all, no longer the frightened child who had stumbled upon Kireth's bones on a forgotten mining world. He had become something unprecedented, a human who could speak as an equal to beings that had walked between the stars since before his species had learned to make fire. When the final battle came, it was fought not in space but in the realm of consciousness itself. The Prometheus leaders, desperate to maintain their power, attempted to use stolen dragon technology to sever the bonds between the awakened sleepers and their human allies. But they had underestimated both the strength of those bonds and the power of someone who carried the blood of 3 houses. Tommy stood at the center of the great song, his consciousness linked to every awakened dragon and every bonded human in the galaxy. Through him, they sang a new verse into the cosmic symphony, one that spoke of cooperation instead of conquest, wisdom instead of mere cleverness, and the infinite potential that emerged when different species chose to walk together among the stars. When the song ended, the Prometheus group's power was broken. Not destroyed through violence, but simply rendered irrelevant by the emergence of something better. Across the galaxy, humans and dragons began the long work of building a civilization based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Tommy Chen, who had once been nothing more than an ordinary child on a dusty mining world, had become the one whom dragons obeyed not through force or trickery, but through recognition of his role as a bridge between species. A living symbol of what the galaxy could become when its inhabitants chose cooperation over conquest. The age of the new alliance had begun, and Tommy stood at its heart. No longer just human, no longer just dragon-bonded, but something entirely new, the first of a generation that would define the future of the galaxy itself.